Microphone check. Ladies and gentlemen, we are live. The Coffee and Biscotti Show. I'm your host, crew Mel Bellissimo. Today is Friday, June 3rd, just past 12 o'clock Eastern Daylight Savings Time. And it's a beauty here in the nation's capital. The sun is shining and I'm smiling. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you are feeling great and shining your light to your family and your communities. My friends, I always say that I'm excited for a show, but sometimes there's that level of excitement that is really tough to, explain in just simple words. I've said this in the past that in Neil Donald Walsh's Conversations with God, he says that God's experience with you doesn't come in the form of words because words are limiting. So I come to you in feeling. And so today, I have this great feeling. I have this great feeling about my guest and the show today because you couldn't read this shit or see this shit in a movie. That's what I'm talking about. And I'll tell you, it's really quite remarkable because some might say that I have lived quite an interesting life and met some very interesting characters. Certainly here on the show, you've had a chance to meet people like Spider Jones and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's uncle, Ricky Soulman Johnson, the Canadian heavyweight wrestling champ. We also had my boxing coach, the infamous boxing coach, Ricky Atkinson, who is considered the most prolific bank robber in Canadian history and part of the most incarcerated family in Canadian history. But today is just like one of those days where I feel honored. I feel honored that my guest, I get to call him my friend. I'm honored because there are few people you will meet in your life who are really good at listening. My guest is one of those kinds of people where everybody should take a page out of his book, especially when it comes to really being open to listen. On my post today, I put that I've had a lot of loss and suffered a lot of loss over the last couple of years. And my guest is one of those guys that I could call whenever I needed to. And he would be there for me and listen with an open heart, let alone open ears. His story is the one that you would find in a movie. That's the truth. It starts at a young age. I want you to think about what you were doing at 7 years old and what you were involved in at 11 years old. His story is going to blow your mind today, my friends. But I know that you're going to say that everybody has a story, and we all do. Some are just different than others. The beauty about today's show is that we're going to hear of a story of a man who grew up with lots of trial and tribulation. He overcame 3 decades of recovery with addiction. And I have so much to say that I asked his permission to read the bio that he sent to me. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you'll indulge me for a few moments, I would like to read, which I've never, ever, ever done here on the show. But his bio was so compelling that I thought it was important to share. So I have asked my guest if I could share it. So please Settle in your comfortable seat wherever you are in the world and lend me your ears for but a few moments. I was born in 1953 and raised here in Ottawa, the nation's capital. I'm married to Lauren, the love of my life. We have 5 kids, 9 grandkids, 2 active dogs. We work from home. We love to travel, and proud to say we are foodies. I have over 3 decades of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction under my belt. While AA educated me in the areas of self-love, codependency, healthy boundaries, and such, there were areas in my life that just never quite felt complete to me, and I could never really put my finger on it until I was introduced to the grief recovery method by an amazing friend who was interested in it for his role as a chaplain with his outreach ministry here in Ottawa, called the Capital City Mission. The lights went on for me when I began to understand that the same emotions we experience while grieving a loved one who has died are the same emotions that surface when we experience any form of loss. At the age of 7, I attempted to kill my dad. I attacked him with a butcher knife while he and my mother were in a violent fight and in drunken stupor. Needless to say, I was disarmed and pushed aside with ease and experienced a deep sense of loss of self-worth, as I was unable to help my mother. To this day, I'm not sure who called my grandfather, but I do remember sitting on the front steps of our walk-up apartment and him pulling up and walking past us into the house. He came out shortly after and tied the bunk bed that my brother and I slept in to the roof of his old green Ford. He sat us in the back seat before securing it all to the roof of the car. And remember, I was looking back at the open door to our apartment while my sister sat on one side of me and my brother on the other. That was to be the last time I ever lived with my parents. Whew. Now, I was grateful on the one hand for the safety that this new home provided, but resented my grandfather because I held him responsible for my parents not having to do the right things to get us back. I truly felt abandoned by them both. At the age of 11, I was molested by a female neighbor, and within a few months of that incident, happened to find a liquor closet in a friend's basement and quickly discovered the comfort of numbing and not feeling any of the pain that lived inside my broken little heart. I was instantly hooked. At 12 or 13, I found the newness of drugs and just how effective they were at numbing all the pain, and the 3 of us became inseparable. I lived that way until I was 35. Because of the addictions, the friends, and the lifestyle that I subjected myself to, loss came at me in just about every form and often at warp speed. I was subjected to suicides, overdoses, gang violence, resulting in death, incarceration of countless friends, divorces, depression, not to mention the non-tangibles like a loss of self-worth, value, dignity. A whirlwind of chaos, and the weight of it all just accumulated with no real way for me to deal with it. I often felt hopeless and helpless. Now for the good news. Every page I turned of the Grief Recovery Handbook was like the key to a lock that I had been powerless over. Understanding began to awaken and hope began to poke its head out, even after all the years of sobriety. I loved the power of aha moments. I was reading the story of my life on the pages of this book, the story of how ill-equipped we are when it comes to dealing with grief and loss. Was it any wonder that I was excited about becoming a certified grief and loss specialist? While in the classroom taking the certification training, I experienced completion like I had never experienced before. Looking at the loss of my life in graph form was a difficult thing to experience, but that discomfort was dwarfed by the weight of feeling incomplete that I had been living with all these years. Once I understood the power of the process and experienced the freedom and weightlessness it delivered, how could I not want to help as many people as possible? Please take a moment and reflect, because his story makes my hair on my arms stand up. Ladies and gentlemen, this amazing man that I get to call my friend is dedicating his life to help people get through some of the most difficult times of their lives. So, wherever you are in the world, my friends, I want you to get off of your comfortable seat and put your hands together for my friend, Mr. Don Lachance. And the crowd goes wild.
Mel Bellissimo, let me tell you, if everybody delivered their message with the clarity and compassion that you share with, this world would be a much better place.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you for all you do. And I have to thank someone else that I know always takes part in your calls, because I've been blessed by the universe to have this gentleman cross paths with me. Josh Leslie, if you're out there, I just want to acknowledge you, my friend, and say hello.
Uh, Mr. Lachance, Josh is definitely here. He is always here on the Coffee and Biscotti show. And I say this every week, Don. Everybody needs a Josh Leslie in their life.
Yes, I would agree. I would agree wholeheartedly. He's unique and he's a gem.
He certainly is, man. I want to give a special shout out to a dear friend, Franny. We want to know how you did in the interviews, girl. Please write in the chat. Let us know how you did with all these interviews you had. And I know that you're dealing with COVID, and so we are sending you lots of positive healing energy your way, knowing that we are thinking about you. Kisses to you, Franny. We love you lots. Thanks for being here. Don, I want to say to you, I don't know that I've ever had a greater opening than that, to be honest. The story, the way, the words, how you've been able to very eloquently put words together in sentences and sentences into paragraphs that outline the feeling and pain that you experienced growing up, and then, like a great story, the rising action, the climax, the denouement, and once again the rising action is really something that you have illustrated in such a short bio. It's fucking unbelievable.
Well, I don't know that it's unbelievable. It's the story of my life, and I'm grateful for it because it's landed me where I am right now, and I love that. I love where I am right now. I love what I've been equipped with, and I wanted to come on your program because all of us, from a collaborative perspective, have spheres of influence that others will never get to connect with until people like you make a decision to collaborate and introduce others to your sphere of influence. So I don't think there's anything more powerful than that. I always say all of us are smarter than any one of us. And I want to be able to serve your community. And, what I do is very interactive. I have a ton of knowledge and some of it even I'll call wisdom, because I've actually actioned out that knowledge that I've
Mm.
gained, and that converts to wisdom, right?
Knowledge experienced.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to know how I can best serve your community.
Well, I think that first thing, Don, what's important, and this is the lesson that you've taught me, is one of the things that is so important about not only sharing a story, but when we talk about this stigma of mental illness, um, or mental health, we talk about. You've always said that it's about going first, and here you are on a platform sharing your story. And where I want to start, Don, is I want to start from the beginning. I want to start from the beginning of the birth of Don Lachance to 7 years old, that story with your father, and then 11 years old, getting introduced or finding a liquor closet. I want to know all of it, because I know that in that story you're going to drop these nuggets of wisdom. That here's the point, that Don, someone is going to listen to this story and is going to see their life, or there's going to be bits of your story that's going to resonate with someone. And then they're going to look at when we get to the part that says, and now the good news, and say, holy shit, Don's right. It's not bad. It's not all bad, but there is good news. Because people, I don't need to tell you, when they're in the dumps, they don't feel like there's any good news. But listening to your story, Don, really emphasizes the point that if you're in a bad position, have hope, because good news is around the corner.
Absolutely. And one of the difficult things is like we don't get to choose our circumstances. We don't. We're born into situations, and some of us get out of them, and some of us don't. There's always that sad end. Program, when I refer to program, I'm usually talking about AA,
Yep.
has a very sobering but bold truth. Some will die that others may live. We don't get to choose who they are and how that happens.
Mm.
We walk through our circumstance to the best of our ability. And for me, born into that alcoholic environment, there were a number of factors that played into it. And I didn't realize it until I began doing this work, really delving into it, because the process we walk people through is very revealing and it's impactful, because nobody ever thinks about their life from a loss perspective. We're always striving to gain, we're always striving to acquire. And it's how we're conditioned by the world. Um, we're taught how to acquire things. We are never, ever taught how to deal with the loss of things,
Well said, my friend.
ever. So,
Ill-equipped was the word you used.
yeah, yeah, we are. And, it's not only the fact that we're ill equipped, we're conditioned to walk in the different direction, to not feel bad. I keep the 6 myths from the recovery program right beside my door, because while I'm in my office and I'm working with people, I'm talking to people, I'm sharing openly, I'm safe because I'm cognizant, I'm conscious, I'm in the moment, and I'm not plagued by any of that. In fact, I'm shining light on all of those things. And I keep them beside my door because I'm very disciplined to read them to myself every time I walk through my door, because when I leave my premise and I walk out into the world, I'm dealing with people who are blind to all of this and conditioned to live in that. And here they are. Don't feel bad, replace the loss, grieve alone, just give it time, be strong for others, and keep busy. And it robs us of so much. So for me, as I began to move through this, growing up in an alcoholic environment, clarity that was delivered was understanding um, that I always lived with my grandparents. I always. And it was because my dad was never functional enough. He was in the military, was a phys ed instructor, and just because of consumption of alcohol and his upbringing, spent more time in I guess incarcerated in the caboose, as they referred to it in the military. We'd move out from my grandparents' place, live in an apartment for a couple of months, likely, and I can't attest to this, but likely because he wasn't able to pay the rent, and we'd get evicted, and we'd end up back in my grandparents' place. So as as I applied our process and I began to map that out, some of the clarity that's introduced through hindsight is very uncomfortable because you begin accepting and well, you begin with the awareness, and then you acknowledge, and then the wrestle to accept is the struggle that takes place from things that live in our heads, and it's that 13-inch journey to our hearts.
From the head to the heart.
From the head to the heart, 13 inches in the average human body, but a journey that the majority of people will never take, because it's a difficult one. It's one of acceptance.
I love the way you say that. What did you say? 13 inches from
In
your
the
head
average
to your.
human body, yeah.
It's just a remarkable way of saying what I preach, Don, as far as, what I would like to see is more people getting out of their heads and moving into their hearts. That's my line.
Now let's dial it back to the conditioning. When people come to us as specialists, we refer to the event that caused them to show up as the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back.
Right.
And what I mean by that is the intensity of an event that causes someone to break down to a point where they're either going to do something drastic to end their pain in the form of suicide,
Right.
or they will reach out for help because they have nowhere else to go, nothing else to do, that they just feel so lost. And we begin to introduce that the same emotional turmoil they experience through the death of a loved one surfaces with every form of intangible loss. And intangible loss are elements like loss of self worth, loss of value, loss of dignity, loss of innocence. And we become overwhelmed and we don't know what to do. We don't have a way forward. So, as we begin to graph those things out for people, and you look at your life in the form of a graph and just the amount of loss that we experience. So, you hear my story, and it's only I have the ability to do that because I've looked at my life in its entirety to try and figure out why I do some of the things I do.
Mhm.
We hear terms like self-defeating purposes, right? Like self-defeating behaviors, and we learn those things. We take our belief systems in at very early ages from people who were very ill-equipped to provide us with any form of truth. We took our belief systems in from the people we loved most and trusted most, our parents. And as we grow up and we begin to realize who they really were, how are we equipped with any real form of truth? And so we're stuck in those places, right? And we don't know how to get out of them. And so the conditioning keeps us trapped in there, and we're anchored to pain around six little words and things that I had to live through. We're anchored to pain around different, better, more, hopes, dreams, and expectations. So I
One
talk
more
about
time. One more time, Don. Those 6 words. We're
we're
anchored because of.
in incomplete emotional elements experience around different, better, more, hopes, dreams, and expectations. So if you look at the events that unfold in your life, you wish that things could have been different. You wish that things could have been better. There could have been more of. What dreams, what hopes, what expectations were never met? In the form of death, the person is gone. We still are anchored to all the things we wish we could have said. How many times have you heard someone? Or how many times have you even whispered I wish I could have said
Right.
for someone you lost?
Well, Don, as I mentioned 5 weeks ago, I had a friend who took his own life, and it's funny you say that because when I originally had found out, the first thing that I said was, "Geez, I wonder if there's something that I could have said to change the outcome." Thank you, Josh, for writing them, because Josh Leslie's the best. Different, better, more hopes, dreams, and expectations.
And the burdens we carry are all of these elements of incompleteness. So when you read my story, my recovery process has equipped me with a couple of things. And here's a nugget. Here's a nugget for the community. We've all heard the term brutally honest. When you do self-worth work, and you get to show up authentically, you learn the art of being lovingly truthful as opposed to brutally honest. Same destination, but received in a much different way.
Mm.
And it's the softening. It's removing the edges. It's showing up to not judge, to not analyze, to not criticize.
Don, but I have to say that I've certainly met some interesting people in my journey, and I don't think that my story is any different than anybody else's. Although my friends always said, "Mel, you're the kind of guy who's lived enough life for two people in two lifetimes already." But I do believe that I wanna sort of I want to know about the process because Dr. Dyer talks in his book with all in his story or in his movie called The Shift: Ambition to Meaning. He talks about one day going into a restaurant with his family, and the restaurant that they're at lost their liquor license because they served a minor. And do you know that because they didn't serve beer to him, he picked up the family, got his wife to put all four kids in the thing, get him, and go to the restaurant. And it's at that point that he's kind of said, "Holy shit, I think I've got a problem." So I want to hear this story as it unfolds, Don, of your life, because I want to get to that. I don't know if it was a quantum moment, as Dr. Dyer calls it. I don't know that there was one thing that happened that sort of catapulted you into this, to the good news. But if it's okay in you sharing that story, Don, I want to know at 11 years old,
Mhm.
you find a friend's liquor closet and you start to understand the numbing effects that alcohol does for you.
Mhm.
What was life like at 11 and 12? Because to me, that's a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a kid. But, you know, we take on responsibilities, and it's a plague for, I think, the first child in any family that experiences the birth of siblings. We take on this responsibility, and it was just a natural thing. The level of empathy that I was born with, I buried for years because I lived in the underbelly of the world. You cannot feel and live
Any
in that
empathy,
world.
of course.
You can't. You don't survive. You're marked instantly if you show any of that because it's seen as a sign of weakness.
Weakness. Of course.
Absolutely.
Of
And,
course.
so now reinforced by the myths of being strong for others, the weight that that puts on you. So, anyways, finding liquor and its ability to numb removed the edge and of the responsibility I felt to take care of my sister and my brother. And it was interesting because as I work through the process, there are specific steps that we walk through. The first portion of it is really kind of exploratory, and I apologize up front here because I know you want me to talk about my story. It's the events of my story that have led me to the good news. There's enough bad news in the world.
Yes, of course. Of course. Yep.
There is that I have a tendency to want to focus on the good things. Like, what the ravaged life I was presented with and forced to live, how it surfaced into just and I'll call it a bright light because so many other people have referred to it as that.
Hmm.
When you can sit and simply be present for someone else to suffer in silence and not feel a need to fix them, because we can't.
I have a bit of trouble with that.
We all do because we want to be active. We want to do something that we believe will make a difference. And it's one of the crazy things about the emotional realm. How many friends have you got won't show up at a funeral because I don't know what to say? The person's gone. Like, it won't make a matter if I'm there. It won't make a difference. I don't know what to say to the people, so I don't go.
Hmm.
And we don't ever have to say anything to anybody who's grieving. Simply being in the same room with them, letting them know that we're there, just to share, just to carry that with them. Our presence is the only thing needed.
Yeah. That's a very
So,
powerful thing, Don, because I sort of rebelled against a little bit of the Italian culture about funerals and weddings because I just kind of feel like they're all just really big business. And so I remember saying, like, I don't know why people show up. They didn't even respect the person that was dead. They never respected him when he was alive. Why would they respect him when he's dead? But you bring a new perspective to that and saying, well, maybe it's not for the person, maybe it's for the people that are grieving.
always,
Yeah. Yeah.
always,
Pardon
and
me.
and and we show up, and we can have disdain, we can have disrespect, we can have everything else for the departed, but they're not the people we're there for.
Yeah.
And it's a lens shift too, right? Because whenever something like that happens, it's a direct reflection on the finite amount of time that we have. And we begin to look internally, and we're all very, very uncomfortable at looking internally. It's why we always want to find reasons and excuses. That's what gets us into trouble.
Of course.
The head, we always want to justify. We always want to find reasons for why things are unfolding the way they are, and don't want to do the internal work so that the outward circumstances change.
Well, and I love that, Don, because I think that that's part of the same message that even Dr. William Glasser in Choice Theory talks about, that we're sort of always looking the externally for validation, but all the all the things that we really need are within ourselves.
Always, always. So when when I look at my life and some of the things that unfolded, growing up in the alcoholic environment, being shuffled back and forth to my grandparents' place, living out on our own, until finally it got to a place where that fatal morning happened. I heard the screaming. I came downstairs, saw my father, had my mother up against the wall, was battering her. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the butcher knife, came into the room, and really tried to go at him with the butcher knife. And him being in the shape he was, like, it was very, very easy for him to disarm me and fling me
Of
into the
course, you were
corner, right?
7.
Absolutely. Just a kid. And I'm not a big man, like, so every ounce of worth that could have lived in a little 7-year-old body just seeped out of me because I was unable to protect my mom.
Yeah.
It's all I wanted to do. So instantly, how did I want to try and validate that? By protecting my sister and my brother.
Right.
So it became a lifetime of activity of looking for self-worth by never taking care of self. And the shifting that began to take place as a result of just, you know, not wanting to be in the house because I had such an incredible resentment towards my grandparents for keeping us there, believing that it was their fault that my parents didn't have to step into the responsible role of parenting us and allowed them to just go their separate ways. And at the same time, this incredible sense of gratitude that my grandfather had created a safe space for us.
Mm.
Not us so much as for my brother and sister.
Don, can we talk a little bit about that, because it's something that really touches home for me, because I've known, whether it's, we're talking, a cultural thing, but certainly in the Italian culture, it's plagued with people that are never looking within their own life and their own selves, or doing the what we call the internal work, and sort of blaming it on the fact that they've got to help everybody else. Talk to me a little bit about that. What's conceptually, why are we doing this? Why do people decide, well, I just can't look at my own life because I'm much too busy. I have to take care of my husband, I have to take care of my kids, or I've got to take care of my wife, I got to take whatever it is, whatever the situation is. But it seems that over the course of 20 years, this story has become more prominent in the conversations I have with people.
Well, it's the nature of work that you've taken on. You're
For
looking for
sure.
people to step into authenticity, and you've created a platform for that to happen. So, here's a quote that changed the course of my life, and it happened during personal development, studying Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And here's the quote: "We find what we look for."
Take us
And
deeper.
so, well, let's use COVID as an example. There's the vaccine community and there's the anti-vaccine community. Let's just break it down into those two things. And I want to be mindful here because I made a conscious decision when the first lockdown took place that I would not take sides. Not that I don't have an opinion, not that I don't have a thought process around it, but for the nature of work I do, I'm a safe space for people. I do not judge, do not analyze, and I do not criticize. So, whatever it is you're looking for, wherever it is you feel trapped, I want to provide you a safe space to be able to plug into that and complete around the different, better, more hopes, dreams, and expectations. So, if we look at that, I talked earlier about us wanting to validate our belief system. So what do? We go out in search of information that's going to validate that belief system. The algorithms are all too smart. What do? They begin to feed us with all the things that we go out and look for. The minute that happens, I'm being reinforced. I've got all of a sudden I've got somebody saying, "Oh yeah, and here's someone you should connect with. Here's someone you should have maybe a conversation with," and that deepens. And now there's two of us that are out looking for the same things, and we're feeding each other the information that we're finding. But guess what? The exact same thing is happening on the other side of that coin for the people who don't believe that this should be unfolding this way. And they go out to validate their belief systems. And so the gap grows wider and wider. I can't look internally at what my turmoil is because I'm too busy trying to solve the problems for everybody else.
Absolutely remarkable.
And so we begin to experience a form of worth in doing that.
Of course.
And we're not doing anything for self internally. We're not moving through any of our pain. We're taking care of everybody else.
Well, it's interesting because I remember having an experience with a student who was telling me about what he called a failed relationship. But he goes on to explain that the woman that he was dating had some uh, um, challenges mentally, and struggled with anorexia or whatever the story was. And stopped for a moment, and I had this feeling, Don. And this feeling came to me to say to him, son, can I ask you something? Everybody that you've dated, that you've told me about, always seems to have something going on, and you become their life support. So I said, how much of this pattern is because this creates a need for you, like you feel like you're needed, and therefore you feel good about yourself. And this pattern repeats. I'm always finding trouble. I've heard it from women, I've heard it from men. I'm always finding people that need me, and then I'm there for them, but then they're not there for me. And this pattern, continues. So I said to him, I said, why is it that why is it that you're looking for someone, or, as you say, you look for the things that you need to validate what's going on, or at least yourself, by saying, well, I'm with this person, I'm helping this person, therefore I'm needed, therefore I feel good about myself, but now the energy is not reciprocated. And of course it can't be, because this other person's not in a good headspace to be able to reciprocate.
Well, they can't. Like, we create all these codependent relationships where we go out, and again, let's tie it back into Napoleon Hill's. We find what we look for. We begin to validate. And so we can't be wrong. And we move further and further and further away from a truth, because truth is always subjective, but we move further and further away from that balance into areas. And for givers, for people who are empathetic, it gets carried to degrees where the empath wants wellness for everybody they connect to more than the people want it themselves. And we do crazy things.
That's a powerful line, eh? So Don, let's not focus on the bad part of the story, or the life story. Let's then talk about, what things did you do to start the process of feeling that self-worth, and sort of stepping out of the area in which we lived with all this self-doubt. What were some of the things that happened to you? Talk us through a little bit about some of the things that you would recommend for my community here, that if you're struggling with A, well, then maybe there's a few things that we could do, almost a step-by-step process, if that was the case.
It I don't think we need to alphabetize it. If you're struggling, period, because that levels the playing field. If you're struggling with A, somebody who's struggling with B won't think they need help because, oh geez, I don't have A. I'm good.
Right.
I'm good. If you're struggling, period. It's the willingness to accept. And here's the perfect example. Um, I often speak about things come at us in the form of awareness. Uh, then we move to the acknowledgement stage, and then there's the acceptance. And from acknowledgement to acceptance, there's the 13-inch journey, right? And again, was some of the longest. And what makes us really uncomfortable is how that all ties into our competency as people. And what I mean by that is, when you don't know what you don't know, you're unconsciously incompetent. We even have a term for it: ignorance is bliss. And then an asshole like me comes along and raises an awareness for someone. And all of a sudden, now I'm consciously incompetent. Somebody's made me aware that I don't know that. And that's not very comfortable. But in that process, we acknowledge the fact that we're uncomfortable. And so what do? We don't want to feel that way.
So we don't accept?
Well, it's not that we don't accept. Now we begin the journey to
I
acceptance.
see.
Because here's what happens. Once you're made aware and now you're consciously incompetent, that's an uncomfortable place for us to sit. So what do? We begin to glean, we begin to look for solution, we begin to look for ways through. And so we find some things that work, and now we become consciously competent. But it's arduous. That's the internal work. It's the things we have to do daily. It's the things that we have to sit in. It's the things we have to do. And that's not really what we want, because we all seek to be unconsciously competent, where the things just become so habitual. We become so in tune with the discomfort that we're quick to accept it. And here's the perfect example. In 1985, and I, I duped myself into believing I had an additional year of sobriety. And let me explain it this way. I quit drinking December 31st at 11:20 at night, New Year's Eve. And for years I claimed I quit drinking in 1985. I couldn't have gotten any closer to 1986.
Minutes away.
And there I was celebrating that entire year. Like, that's deceit, right? So I decided to quit drinking to prove to people that I didn't have a problem. And for the next 3 years, I lived in a state of what program refers to as white knuckling. I was the biggest asshole on the face of the planet. I managed everybody through anger, fear, loathing, and that allowed me to isolate and just wallow in the pity and the injustice and the unfairness of my life. All through that, just remaining pig-headed enough to not pick up and use, to feel the actual numbing. No, I felt all the pain, but didn't know how to do it. And the people who suffered most were the people I loved the most, because I believed in the relationships that we had, that they loved me enough to suffer through the asshole that I was. And I lived that way for 3 years until I finally attended a meeting willingly to learn, and realized that there was a road to recovery. And that's when I began living in recovery.
Don, in the world of metaphysics, in a school an esoteric school that I studied with, we talked about addiction a lot. And we talked about addiction being something that they called a spiritual disconnect. And one of the examples that they gave was, if anyone you knew went through AA, by the end of it, people would have found God, or some form of God, some sort of higher power. What would you say to a statement like that? A spiritual disconnect.
What is spirituality?
Can I read you my definition of it?
Sure.
Let me bring it up. I will bring it up for you, my friend. because it's one that I quite enjoy. But you got to give me a second to bring it up. So
Absolutely.
the what I loved about this definition was is that I was trying to create a point of the difference between religion and spirituality. So religion by definition is a personal set of institutionalized system of religious attitudes, beliefs and practices, the service of and worship of God or the supernatural. Spirituality is the aspect of humanity that refers to the way individuals seek and express meaning and purpose and the way they experience their connectedness to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, and to the significant or sacred.
That's beautiful.
I like that definition.
That's beautiful. Because what it does for me is just frees me up to not want to define what spirituality is for anybody else. And again, when we look at how we're equipped to deal with things, we're not. We're always taught to walk in a different direction,
Of
and we
course.
want to figure everything out.
But Don, what's the answer then? What's the answer? Like, I mean, in all of your experience, I mean, you have experience of two men in two lifetimes. What would you say? Do you think that it's something that from an educational standpoint with kids in school that we learn about mental illness, that we discuss these things? What's some of the things that you've come up with in your experience or ideas that you have? Because if we're not equipped with something, and I get this because that's a whole deep story about all the systems that are created are not created by the light, and this is not a place of light that we live in, but we are the light, that we are beings of light, and therefore we can create the environment by sharing our light and collectively as a group coming together. And we're going to talk a little bit about in a little later about the Dare to Be Vulnerable project. But I want to ask you about that. What can we do to better equip people?
Well, it all comes down to really showing up and holding safe space. Again, I'll talk about the motto, I go first. Um, I share from that place of vulnerability. Not not really, not that I don't care, but I'm mindful of how powerful that is. I care deeply. It's why I do the things I do. And I show up knowing that somebody might be offended by the authenticity, might be offended by how I show up, by the things that I'm willing to talk about. They want to judge and they want to, well, geez, I could never do that. And it alienates some people. But for others, you talk about us being a light. Many of us are, but we choose to live under a bushel.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure.
We do. So it's the willingness to take that off and to show up authentically, to talk about the things that make us uncomfortable. It really is because it begins there.
And do you think that there's a space for this in the educational system? Do you think that maybe this is something that should be included?
Absolutely. The same way I do, they should teach us a lot more about the financial realm,
Of
about,
course.
about all of that. Like, we're looking at just how lacking the educational system has been. And I'm not knocking teachers and I'm not knocking the educational system. I'm talking about preparing people for what they're going to be dealing with, what they're going to be faced with in the real world. And it's just been cruel on that front. It has. We've been, and I don't want to go down that whole rabbit hole because it's easy to go down. The whole premise behind what I do is to be there for people who really feel they need to reach out and seek help and want to find a way through the discomfort that they're living in, and creating that safe space for them to be able to do that.
Yeah. Don, over the last couple of days, we've had a couple of opportunities to chat, and I want to talk about a word. I really want to talk about a word that has come up in our conversation time and time again, and even yesterday at the True North Navigators pub every Thursday, the event that we all go to, the online event. I want to talk about this word for surrender.
Hmm.
Can we sort of revisit the conversation that we had a couple days ago about surrendering and what that word actually really means? Because I found it to be so powerful, the things that you talked about, and it was super excited about yesterday's conversation because we had one member in the pub who said, well, I don't really resonate with the word surrender.
Surrender will take on different meaning for different people. Um, but I think if we look at it through the lens of ending turmoil, it becomes a much more palatable topic. Because what are we taught? What are we conditioned for? To fight for what we want, to compete, to get ahead, to be all that. And in order for that to happen, there's a complex world out there where competition takes over and we begin doing things that we typically might not do as people. But again, more of the conditioning: be strong, be tough, suck it up, buttercup, keep
Mm,
busy, move through things, just do it. We want to do that. And we wonder where the discomfort comes from. And we're in this constant state of warring. We're in battle and we get battle weary and we don't know what else to do. And so we continue to fight, we continue to fight, and we just spiral downwards. We just continue to spiral downwards with no relief, with no help, with nowhere to look. And the battle rages on. The minute you surrender, the battle ends. You get a chance to rest. You get a chance to begin to take in. You get a chance to think, to feel.
is there a real life example in your life, Don, that because we certainly talked about mine when we were in over the conversation, and I said to you that there's a lot of surrendering happening for me now.
Mhm.
I've tried to push so hard, coaching SEAL team leaders, the Wolf Pack, all these different things that I'm doing. Josh and introduced me to corporate connections and all of these things that I'm putting energy towards, with of course with the hopes of providing enough of an income so that I can raise a son. But can you provide maybe a story or an example? Yes, Edwin and Twitch. I want to know. I want to know a little bit about when did you start to understand this concept or this idea of surrendering? When did it come to you?
It was surrendering to the fact that I was powerless over alcohol was my first introduction to it. Because the war rages when you're trying not to drink. And it's that ugly cycle. The ugly cycle. We don't want to step into the real reasons why we're numbing. In fact, most of the time we're oblivious to it because of the conditioning. And so we continue to live in these states of numbness because at least that is bearable. And I look at the carnage that created in my life, where like it was absolute mayhem. One of the things that got me to look at the fact that I was having a problem, a Tuesday morning, sitting in my living room, well, my dining room, with my construction partner sitting next to me, and a buddy came in, and we were sitting down at the table. We were drinking. It's like 10 a.m. in the morning, and he decides he's going to roll a big cracker. and gets busy doing that. And then I hear my wife scream, Donnie. And I turn and I look. There's my youngest daughter with a cigarette dangling out of her mouth, a beer bottle in one hand, and my buddy's gun in her other hand. And I looked at her and I said, Come here, baby. She came over and I just took the gun, took the cigarette out of her mouth, and put the beer bottle on the table and was shaken to the core of my being. It was the first time I accepted that things had gotten out of control. I'd moved past the acknowledgement in an instant. This was insanity. But it was years before I made a decision to take that step. Again, equipped, right? Continued to wrestle with it.
Right.
Continued to war with it. Continued to battle it. I can fight this. I can get through this. And the battle rages on, and we make no headway because we're busy fighting all the wrong things.
And is that where the surrender comes into place?
Absolutely. Absolutely. See, I didn't want to be doing the things I was doing, but I lived in such a state of numbness and lived with that as being in control. I decide when I'm going to do this. I decide when I'm going to drink. It was like me, really, when my grandfather moved us into the house, this whole gratitude feeling with this mixed emotion lived right beside it. Like I lived with that dilemma constantly of this just absolute hatred for them because I held them responsible for my parents not getting back together, yet this angelic savior that provided a safe space for us all at the same time, living in that constantly. So wanting to move away from it. And the minute, by 12, I was staying out 2, 3, 4 days at a time. I discovered drugs. I discovered alcohol. It was a comfortable place for me. At 17, all of that reinforced when I got my girlfriend pregnant. And we had a son, both Catholic backgrounds. It was hush hush. The nuns were involved. Here's me at 17 in the throes of alcoholism and heavy drug addiction. Very ill equipped, not prepared to bring up a child. I was a broken kid myself. My girlfriend, same thing, coming out of an incredibly dysfunctional arena. And so the baby was given up for adoption. He found me on Facebook 12 years ago.
No kidding.
No kidding. He and I developed this incredible relationship, right? But it only took place online. I was able to reconnect with his mother as a result of him finding me because I asked him, how did you find me? He was reluctant to share it because years prior to that, she'd come to me after losing a child that she had in a drowning accident to say, Donnie, I'm going out to find our son. Do you want to meet him when I find him? I was still in heavy throes of alcoholism and addiction. And I said, nah, Jackie, nah, leave me out of this. If you find him, good for you. I don't want any part. He doesn't need me. He doesn't need me. Yet when he found me, it gave me an opportunity to reconnect with her. And she told me she was off to Texas because he grew up in Texas. She was off to meet him and shared with me what she was going to be dealing with because there were some things going on with him that she wasn't in agreement with. And my word to her was, whoa, just go and be who you need to be. Don't try and parent this man. Like we gave up those rights way back when we gave them up. Do not do that. Develop a relationship with him. She couldn't hear that. She went in and she did some stuff and it really set things off. He said, pack it, like not interested.
Yeah.
And ended that relationship. And I believe there was always a reluctance for him to meet me live because he didn't want to experience that again.
Right, of course.
He just didn't want to experience that. And last April or May, talking to him on a FaceTime, and I said, "Look, Vince, once all this COVID stuff is up, are you good for a visit?" And he said, "Yeah, Pops, I'm good." And I said, "Awesome." That was April, May. He died of heart failure in July.
Wow.
And so, equipped with a better tool set than the average person,
Then your average bear.
yeah, I began to process and got a call from his wife 2 weeks later. Well, from my granddaughter's mother, because it was a unique situation there as well. Like maybe a story for another time, Mel.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
You know, I just I looked at it and she said, "Don, Vince had an appointment at the cardiologist last February to discuss getting stents, and he didn't show up and didn't tell anybody about it." 2 weeks into me processing the loss of my son and the complexity around that because of never having met him in person, but having developed this faultless, blameless friggin' relationship, right? That was
Mm.
like perfect because there no challenges. Everything was just very open, right? I can remember telling him when he found me, "Look, give me 24 hours to just reel in this because emotionally I'm all over the place right now. But I'll guarantee you that I will answer any question you have. There is nothing that is out of bounds. I will be 100%
Transparent.
transparent with you." And so he said, "I appreciate that." Sent me a message a couple of seconds later saying it would be at least cool if he accepted my Facebook friend request.
Right,
I knew I was dealing with my son, right?
right, right.
So I did. But 2 weeks into me processing that deep loss and all the complexity around it, now anger flared up because he could have done something responsible and gone to that and found out what they could have done to help him through this.
Wow, what a
Mhm.
story. So then let's get to the good news. Let's get to the good part, Don. Let's talk about this word gratitude for a moment. It's a word that a lot of people seem to be using nowadays. It's funny how I can see so many people online talking about gratitude and come from a place of gratitude. But I'd love to hear your sort of thoughts of why gratitude is important and why coming from a place of gratitude. A lot of people, and it's funny because it's almost like words become fads. So this time it's the word gratitude, hashtag gratitude, and all this other stuff. But let's talk about it for a moment, Don.
Sure. What is it you want to address on that front?
Well, I think that again, why is it important to come from a place of gratitude? Maybe we can start with a definition of gratitude.
Well, gratitude. Well, could you pull that up?
I don't know. I certainly can. Mr. Josh Leslie, any chance we can pull up a definition of gratitude?
I think that's a double-edged sword, right? Because expressing gratitude can be a hiding place for us not to deal with some of the inconvenient things that are unfolding.
Which is why that I bring it up.
Hmm.
Which
Yeah,
is why I bring it up.
and often that happens with trends, right? Like, oh, geez, I'm gonna be grateful. I did an interesting project 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. Um, actually,
Here it is. The quality of being thankful, readiness to show appreciation for and to return kindness. That was what I got quickly.
Yeah. 2018, I developed a gratitude book,
A journal. Hmm.
a journal, right? And it was because of a quote I read New Year's Day. What if you only had today what you thanked God for yesterday? That was from Haley Smart. And I began to think about that. Thank you, Josh. The quality of being thankful, readiness to show appreciation for and return to kindness, and to return kindness. Does gratitude need to be reciprocal? You know, it said there in the definition to and to return kindness. I think sometimes just acknowledging gratitude, we can share it. For me, it became an exercise for self because I realized when I read that quote that I'm not always grateful, despite some of the incredible things that unfold in my life. I'm just not grateful. I'm too busy to be grateful. I've got things to do.
Of course. That's
And
another key buzzword. Busy.
yeah, and so when I read my wife's quote, I thought, wow, I'm going to take on this challenge here, and I'm going to write down 5 things that I'm grateful for every day. And that book traveled with me for a year, 365 days. I never missed a day. And it was amazing some of the things that came up in that gratitude exercise. I didn't publish it. I didn't tell anybody about it. I simply did it for self. It was just an ability for me to recognize that there were good things unfolding in my life despite some of the shit that was being thrown at me at the same time. And there's incredible danger in comparison because when you compare, one side of the coin is going to lose.
Of course.
You know,
Yep.
it's one of the things we teach in our process, not to compare, because it keeps us from experiencing what we're actually going through. We're always looking for a way to dodge that discomfort. And here's the one we use. You know, I felt bad that I had no shoes until I met the man with no feet. It's a trap, right? We're constantly looking for something that's not going to have us connect to the pain we're actually feeling. It's okay to feel badly that you don't have shoes. You don't have to look for a reason that's darker and deeper than yours because it will keep you from experiencing what you're truly feeling. That's how strongly we've been conditioned to
Yeah.
not feel.
So true, man. So true. If you don't have shoes, you look for somebody that doesn't have feet.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of the conundrums and one of the most difficult things about alcoholism. We constantly move the target. We constantly move the depth of degradation in the example. I'm not an alcoholic. I have a job, and like I've got my house until you lose your job and you lose your house. And then I'm not an alcoholic because I haven't lost my family. They're all still around me. We got a nice apartment until you lose your family and your apartment. And well, I'm not an alcoholic because like I'm not stuck on the street or sleeping at the Salvation Army until
You're
you're
sleeping
on
at
the
the
street and
Salvation.
sleeping at the Salvation Army. And well, I'm not really an alcoholic. I don't really have a problem because I'm not the guy caught in the friggin' alleyway full of puke and nowhere else to go. Does it have to get to that place?
Right.
So we're constantly pushing boundaries in order for us to not have to step into the discomfort of what our circumstance is.
Edwin wrote, Don, I guess it could work on the opposite end. There's always someone with more, the forever struggle to get more.
Yeah, the competitive nature that we're designed with, right? Like,
Yep.
and I talked about it earlier. We're conditioned and taught how to acquire and how to fight and how to get. We're never educated on how to deal with when we lose those things.
Yeah.
And we wonder why we get so discombobulated and why we get so we dive into despair. We don't like sink into it. We dive into it.
Yeah. You know, Don, I think it's a perfect segue into sort of understanding now a little bit, after all of this wonderful explanation, chat around so many different things. What I wanted to spend time on as we get close to the end of the show is I want to know what you do, Don. Like, what's involved when someone comes to see you? What's the process that you go through? In if somebody's suffering, if somebody's going through some difficult time in their life, and they want to reach out to you, Don, what's sort of some of the process that you go through?
Well, it's a 6 week based program, and typically an hour a week. There's reading and there's homework involved for people who get to a place, and we talked about it early on. It's usually an event that triggers something, and they feel like they can't move forward, right? And then we begin to educate them on um, all of the intangible loss that our lives are made up of. And what does that really entail? What does that consist of? What does that look like? And when you begin to understand that, the same emotional turmoil again surfaces for all the intangible loss, and those are things like if you moved as a kid. That's an example we use with people right away. You've been you've incurred incredible loss. Your parents tell you, geez, we're moving, and like they're all happy, and you start to think right away, holy moly, like what's going on here? Like I'm losing my friends. I like this, the neighborhood I'm comfortable with. Like I love this house. They're disrupting your comfort zone, everything that you feel safe in, everything that you know is familiar. And what do they say? Oh, dad's got a better job. We're moving into a nicer house. Here, have a cookie, go to your room, go watch TV, go play your game. Telling you not to feel bad, not acknowledging any of the pain that you're going through. So it's educating people on how cumulatively negative loss is in our lives. And so we begin to experience that in the form of graph work. So the first couple of sessions are really exploratory, and they just begin to paint a picture of exactly what it is we've lived with and why we do some of the things we do. And then as we begin to graph those things out, when you look at the loss that your life is made up of in graph format, it's extremely sobering. And then we move through there because in that graph, there's a relationship that has impacted you. For me, it was, you'd think it was would have been my dad's relationship with me. But because he got sober a couple of years after I did, he approached me one day, and like it was still tumultuous. It was still an ugly, ugly relationship. He approached me and said, look, he said, I want to work through some of the tension that lives between us, and I want to deal with that. And I said, you don't stand a fucking chance. Still wanted to kill him. And he said, I'll own what's mine. I want you to be willing to own what's yours, and deal with this. We locked ourselves into an apartment for 4 days, and you wouldn't believe what came out of that. But the last words I heard my dad speak to me were, I love you, son. And I said, I love you too, dad. I was to pick him up the next day to take him to a show because that's what we were going to start to do, go see a movie, go out to dinner, discuss the movie. I'd take him home. He died that night.
Holy shit.
He died that night. But anyways, to get back to the process, the relationship that I had to work through was the one with my grandfather, where I lived in this friggin' incredible gratitude and incredible resentment
Right.
and the darkness that created. right? The dilemma in that. So I work through that. And in doing that work, as you graph out your loss and you choose a relationship to work through, then we begin to introduce the recovery components that come to us in the form of apologies, forgiveness, significant emotional statements that help us complete around those six magical words: different, better, more, hopes, dreams, and expectations. And then we journal that out. And then there's one tool that we hand off at the very end. And I can guarantee that if people step up and do this difficult work, they will be equipped to deal with any loss that they've experienced up until the point they meet us, and any loss they will incur from this point moving forward. That's a
Very
statement I
interesting.
can make with a very bold face
Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
because I've watched it. Like everything else, recovery is not only possible, but probable if you're willing to do the difficult emotional work,
Yeah.
whether it be loss, whether it be addiction.
Tell us, Don, a little bit about this exciting project that you're working on. I want to know. I want to sort of share with our friends in the Twitchiverse about this Dare to Be Vulnerable project.
Teamed up with Susan Blaine on this. Susan was a guest of yours last week.
Yes.
Fabulous episode. I just love the heart she shares with, right? And she's just very plugged into um, conversations and how they change when we share from that place of authenticity, that discomfort. And she did her series Susan B, sharing with Susan B, and had a bunch of I guess coffee meetings that she had, and out of those 105 coffee meetings chose 60 people that were willing to stand up and talk about challenges that they've had in their businesses,
Mm-hmm.
real world challenges. And that was a very successful project. And then she started looking at, she shared openly on the trauma that she's survived, and where she is with all of that, and how that became kind of a driving force for her. And I'd done a number of interviews with her, or let me dial it back, not interviews, I keep wanting to call them that because they're like question and answer, right? And they're not. They're just two really good friends having honest conversation.
Right. Right.
and
Yeah.
and and that makes the difference, right? So when she started talking to me about this, I have a good friend that I did a lot of work with in the communication and design field, Rod Overall. I believe some of your guests may have met Rod when you had
Yes.
all of them on.
That's right. That's right.
And
Ron, and
Ron and
Roderick
Rick,
and Vron. Yeah.
yeah. And so when Rod saw this, Rod's got an interesting story of his own, and he saw this, and it was an opportunity for him and I to really connect and work together again. And he just fell in love with the work that Susan was doing. So got involved in the creative, and now it's taking on this life. And it's easy for us to talk about mental health because that's neat and compartmentalized. We're looking to tackle the stigma, all of the uncomfortable stuff that sits around mental illness, which is the journey that we need to take to experience mental
Mental
health.
health.
You see, it's the ugly side of the coin.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
dealing with the discomfort. It's dealing with the stigma that keeps people, one of the statistics, and we've had a number of conversations with some really interesting people, you being one of them, Mel. You can't help but be affected by a project like this.
Yeah.
You can't. And then you look at the stigma that keeps us, because one of the statistics that we learned is 1 out of 4 people are affected by mental illness. And the more conversations we have, when we query people with what do you think the stats are around that, everybody has said they believe everybody on the face of the planet, everybody is affected by mental illness, either
I
directly or indirectly.
I have to agree.
And so let's look at that. You know, the slide shows one person standing up and three other people sitting down. 1 out of 4 people is affected by mental illness. That's the stat. The reality is everybody is. So what we're taking on with this project is equipping the three people who just didn't have the ability to stand up and raise their hand, move through the stigma that keeps them from doing that, and they remain as silent sufferers because it's shame based, and we're conditioned not to talk about shameful events.
Of course. Sounds like such a great project.
It is. It is. It's a fabulous project. We had an interesting call this morning with a group that's looking to do some really cool things with us on the LinkedIn platform for community building, much like the community you're building and the way you serve this community, Mel. Like, you know, I'm very, very grateful to people like you who are willing to have people like me on that talk about ugly things, that talk about discomfort, that talk about the things that keep us trapped and feeling safe when
And
that's the last place we want to be.
Donna, I'll tell you why I do it, because I believe that information is important. And therefore, we talk about I've talked about choice theory earlier on, that all I can do is use a platform and provide people with information. It's then up to them to do something with the information. But education and educating people on this stigma of mental illness is that something that has to happen, because I believe wholeheartedly we're only starting to see the effects of what 2 years of a global pandemic has done.
Like, I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. Mental illness, there's nothing new about it,
Nothing.
but the quantity and the volume that it's showing up in is very uncomfortable.
I think that the challenge that, like, for example, Don, that I've had in my business is people need to be ready to do the internal work. And part of the difficulty is that I can't help anybody on there unless they're willing to be open and ready to be helped.
Nobody can.
And so this is where it is, because I got to be honest with you. I'm working with corporate America and corporate Canada in providing them, workshops on leadership and planning and responsibility and feedback. And I'm doing these workshops, and I'm working with corporate America, and I got to be honest with you, Don. There's a lot of people that just are not in the know. It's so robotic. The amount of robots that I see is remarkable.
Because it's safe.
Because it's safe, of course, because it's so safe. And so I just feel that, what you and Susan are doing together on this project, Dare to be Vulnerable, the work that is done here on the Coffee and Biscotti show. My job is, I'm blessed. I mean, I said this last week, Don, I make $0 doing the Coffee and Biscotti show, like literally zero. And yet somehow I just can't give it up. I don't.
Because
I
it's
just.
worthwhile work, Mel.
It's worthwhile work. It's purposeful work.
Yeah, it's worthwhile work. It's shedding light. You know, the minute we stop chasing, it's interesting that like it even turns around that way, because in order for us to really accomplish what we're looking to accomplish with the Dare to Be Vulnerable project, phase one requires funding for us to be able to do that. And so we're not. I it's a catch 22, right? Like we're not focused on chasing the money. We're focused on finding the right collaborative platform where people are going to look at investing in this.
Correct.
This makes sense. We need to get this message out. But it's in having those conversations and finding the people who want to collaborate. There's not just Susan and I involved in this. Rod Overall is heavily vested in this from a design and a
Branding. Yep.
communications perspective.
Yep.
Absolutely, like just very incredible. He's a maximizer. Carlo Lombard, who is also involved in this project. He was the original um, partner with Susan in all of this. So I don't want to discount the people who are already invested in this. We've got a few other people that are getting ready to lift their hand, raise their hands, and say, "I want to get behind this. How can I help? How can I take part in this?" You voiced, yeah, yeah. Like I love seeing that, right? Like you voiced an interest in being able to do that. And again, like I'll dial it back to all of us are smarter than any one of us. And the more honest conversation we can have around the stigma that keeps people from standing up and talking about their challenges on that front,
Yeah.
the better it is. So it's leveling that playing field.
Don, I have to say, man, you remind me a lot of Ricky because of Ricky Atkinson because I always said that when Ricky talks, man, do I ever actively listen. And I'll say the same thing to you, Don. When you speak, I actively listen, you know?
Thank you, Mel.
I'm really, really, you really resonate with me. The things that you say, the way that again, you make words into sentences and sentences into paragraphs, really, really touches my heart. And I think that, I think that, the difficult that I've had over the last little while is while I'm trying to build a business amidst a global pandemic, I, I get the same response. Well, you should just go get a job. I have trouble with that, Don.
Yeah,
To
where's the
me, that's
fulfillment?
like, yeah, because to me, that's like telling somebody who broke up with their girlfriend, don't worry, there's plenty of fish in the sea.
Yeah. Mel, you use those expressions, right? And there are things, although they may be intellectually accurate, they are completely void of any emotional value.
Exactly. Exactly the point. They are void. I know everybody says, well, do you want to go work at a restaurant? Do you want to go why don't you be a truck driver? Why don't you go deliver for FedEx? And in my brain, I'm going, guys, it's just going like this, eh? Like I don't even know what you're talking about. FedEx who? I don't I don't know what you're talking about
Yeah.
because my heart of hearts, Don, I feel the need to do something that's going to be purposeful.
Yep. We need to learn to get out of our own way for that to sometimes occur.
Well, and that's part of it, and that's where the surrendering for me came in, Don. That's
Yeah,
why
I
I
know.
brought it up because I'm pushing, man. Man, I have friends that say, my buddy Ralph says to me, "Man, you're a hustler, eh, bro? You're going to be 47 this month, and you're still hustling." Well, I think you said it best the other day, Don. You're 70,
I'll
and
be
you're still
70 in February.
reinventing yourself.
Absolutely. I'm recreated daily.
Yeah. Want to give a special shout out to a dear friend, Wendy. I hope she's still listening. And to Sandra, thank you for Franny, for all of us. Don, thank you so much for shining your light to this community because you, my friend, are a bright light.
Thank you, Mel. I appreciate everything you're doing, my friend.
You
I
are
really do.
you're such an amazing guy, Don. I could speak to you all day long.
Well, let's.
I
Let's.
really
There's
could. But
there's
I
lots for
promise
us
you
to do.
this. I promise you this, my friend, live on the Coffee and Biscotti show, we are going to go and experience some Thai cuisine with yours truly at Nana Thai, located at Preston and Somerset in Ottawa. Go and see her. She's an awesome woman, and we're gonna go and break bread together, my friend,
I love that.
at Nanatai for sure.
I love that. Always championing.
Yes.
Always.
I want to give again, Franny, thank you. And of course, Franny, you can come for dinner with us. She wrote, Mel is such a gift, and so are you, Don.
Thank you, Franny. Thank you very much. I hope
Um,
your audience has just found some clarity in this, and I just hope it's what you expected too, Mel.
yeah, you're amazing, Don. I'm like I said, man, I can hang out with you all day long. You're that guy. I could just chill. And you know what the best part is that Ray Liotta passed a little while ago, and of
Mm,
course we spoke about that last week on the show about him being in Goodfellas and my favorite movie. But I
yes.
think that we have lots of stories that we could share about the underbelly of society.
Oh yes.
And then talk about and then turn the page. We could talk about the underbelly, but talk about the goodness that could come from that if we learn to sort of change our lenses.
Yeah. Always a lens shift.
Always a lens shift, my friend. Don, I'm going to bridge you backstage as I give my final thoughts and as we raid on to the next channel. But thank you from my
Thanks,
heart to
Mel.
yours, Don. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you
brother.
very much, my friend. Thank you, community, for having me today.
Thank you, Don.
Josh.
Oh, Josh, he said something. I'll find out what it was for you. My friends, the stigma around mental illness, the Dare to Be Vulnerable project, all of these different things that we spoke about today, the word gratitude, the word surrender, Dawn being a grief and loss specialist, all of these different and the stories. I mean, guys, I'll be honest with you that what we got was just like a scratching of the surface of the story. And I was cool with it because I understand. One of the things that Ricky Atkinson talked about was this idea that writing a book about his life was probably one of the most difficult things that he had to do because he had to relive emotionally those events as he's writing them down. And I'll have to say that, with Don and the things that he's experienced in his life, I can understand. I can understand the difficulty in reliving those experiences and how and love how he's turned them around and now has said, I'm going to do good because I believe that once I got introduced to this advanced or this grief program, grief and loss program, that there is no wonder why he is an absolute expert of with the work that he does. So I want to thank Don again. Josh, where are we rating to today, my friend? Give us a little bit of love. Let us know where we're going to today. And of course, as always, join us next week on the Coffee and Biscotti Show. I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to do it again, my friends. I ain't going to tell you who the guest is next week, just so you have to show up and see for yourself. But I promise you, it's going to be a good one. So make sure to come and see us. Sending much love to you, Franny. Have yourself a wonderful weekend. I hope that this whole COVID thing subsides for you. Sending you lots of love, hugs, and kisses. Josh, where are we headed, my friend? From my heart to yours. Oh, here we go. Today, I thought it fitting to raid someone with a more chill and contemplative vibe. So we are off to California for some acoustic tunes, courtesy of the talented Lisa. Hold on a minute. Lisa Ritchie music. So we will go there. Stick around for some great music following the Coffee and Biscotti Show. From my heart to yours, my friends, sending you all love for a happy Friday and an even awesomer weekend. This is Crew Mel signing off. We'll see you next week. Peace.